I now welcome Climate Change Balmain Rozelle, Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action Burwood, Canada Bay and Newtown Climate to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and capacity which you appear before the committee, and we'll start with you, Ms. Fehrenberg.
I'm Angela Freiberger, Government Relations Advisor with Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm Ken Enderby, the President of Climate Action Burwood, Canada Bay.
Thank you.
I'm Madeline Parker. I'm a committee member with Newtown Climate.
I'm Amanda Dawkins. I'm a committee member with Newtown Climate.
I'm Derek Bolton. I'm with Climate Change Balmain Rozelle, and I wrote the submission that we made.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Before I invite you to make a brief opening statement, then we proceed to discussions. Would you please state if you're a current or former member of a political party, a union or an investor in the renewable or nuclear industries? Ms. Fehrenberger.
Thank you. I've never been a member of a political party in Australia. In the United States, where I'm originally from, I registered as a Democrat. I'm not and haven't been a member of a union.
Thank you.
I do believe in putting my money where my mouth is, and I do hold some investments in renewable energy and renewable energy funds and companies.
Thank you very much. Ms. Enderby.
I've never been in a political party and never will be, and I am a member of the retired New South Wales Teachers Federation.
Thank you. Ms. Parker.
I've never been in a political party. I'm a former member of the MEAA and also of the NTEU.
I was a member of the Labor Party. Please don't ask me when I let that lapse.
All good, yeah.
And member of the Retired Teachers, New South Wales Teachers Federation.
Thank you. Mr. Bolton.
I'm a member of the Greens.
Thank you.
And retired.
Excellent. Thank you. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions, and we'll start with you, Ms. Fehrenberger.
Thank you very much. I would really like to thank the committee and support staff for your hard work on this matter, and thank you for the invitation to appear today. Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action is a nonpartisan community organization of people deeply impacted by bushfires, which are already worsening due to climate change. As a group, we have lived experience of losing homes, seeing our communities fractured, our natural environment destroyed. Our members simply want to feel safe, but we know risks are increasing under worsening climate change, so our overriding concern is to reduce that risk. I note my position here is not based on fear of nuclear technology. I'm a veterinary oncologist by training and have studied and performed radiotherapy. I have held a New South Wales radiation user license and used products of the Lucas Heights reactor to help my patients. I understand the risks and benefits of nuclear technology and am not afraid to use it when it's the right tool for the job. This is not one of those times. Our members know we need urgent, ambitious climate action to protect Australian communities and reduce the climate impacts that Australians are already experiencing. Because of previous delays, we are now in the critical decade to reduce climate pollution enough to avoid catastrophic climate change. This urgency underpins our position on this. We do not have the luxury of time to experiment with possible future solutions. All further emissions are already eroding the safety and well-being of Australians, not in the future, now. What we need is not further delay. Nuclear energy in Australia would be simply too slow, uncertain and costly to implement at a large enough scale to achieve the required emissions reductions and meet Australia's energy needs. When we have other excellent choices, it's just not the most practical option for Australia. What we need is to continue the clean, reliable nuclear energy transition that's already underway, proven and working now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Enderby.
Hi. Look, I'm with Climate Action Burwood, Canada Bay. We're a community grassroots group based in the Inner West electorate of Reid and the state electorates of Drummoyne and Strathfield. We are not a protest group, we're an education and lobby group. We work with the local politicians and the councils on practical projects to reduce emissions and promote renewable energy. We're basically looking for practical action on climate change. We're not asking for the Roman Empire to be dismantled by 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We don't see nuclear power as coming into that category, mainly because we don't think it's going to be available in time to replace our coal-fired power stations. We think that if we're going to do that, we might as well go straight to renewables. If we replace those power stations with gas, we're only just getting into the same old basket again of greenhouse gas emissions. Gas is basically methane. It's a little better than coal. The other reason we're opposed to it is on cost. I've for many years now been following the financial disasters that have been happening in Britain and the United States, mainly with Hinkley Point C in Britain, where they just put off the opening date by another 2 years. It was announced in 2007. It's now not going to open until 2031. Votal in the United States is a disaster. There's no nuclear reactors under construction in the United States at the moment. There probably never will be a commercial nuclear reactor under construction again. It's the notion that those countries with decades of experience in nuclear power could do it when we can't do it, and we're supposed to be able to do it from scratch is ridiculous. So we're opposed to it for those reasons. We also feel that nuclear is an industry on decline. The fact is it's gone down. It's halved in terms of its percentage of electricity production in the world. Even in China, the world's leader, with 29 of the 63 nuclear reactors under construction, added just 1.2 gigawatts of nuclear last year. To its grid, it added 278 gigawatts of wind and solar. That's the way for the future. That's where we should be going, and that's what we support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Enderby. Ms Parker.
Mandy will be making remarks on behalf of Newtown Clim.
Hi, my name is Amanda Dawkins. I'm a retired primary school principal and a committee member for Newtown Climate. Newtown Climate was formed by a group of local residents who are concerned about climate change, and we want to see what we can do to reduce emissions in our local area. I got involved because I have grandchildren aged 4 and 2, and I want them to have the same access as I've had to the opportunities and the fun that I have had in this beautiful climate that is unfortunately heating. We have a number of members who are renters, so low emissions technology is really important, but inaccessible for them often. A big part of what we do, therefore, is advocating for renters to have access to low emissions technologies that homeowners do. In our area, we have a large uptake on EV and solar. Those that don't have solar, it's invariably because their roofs face the same way, and as you can imagine, we're all heritage listed, but it is a big uptake with those people that can. We took the opportunity to make a submission to the inquiry because we're aware that nuclear energy is being held up as by a way to reduce climate pollution, and obviously that's something that the experts need to debate, but the issues that we see is that nuclear energy is slow. It's, up to 5 years. There's an innate fear based on Chernobyl, Fukushima. We've also had a lot of seismic activity in the Hunter Valley over the last few months, and that, I believe, is an area that is proposed for a nuclear reactor. It's more expensive long term. The storing of the waste is problematic, and there are ongoing expenses. And the thing is, the radioactive waste is still radioactive for thousands of years. So it's carbon-free, but it's not a non-renewable resource. We see this beautiful country as a place with heaps of sun. We're surrounded by water, and surely we can be innovative by making things happen from our natural resources that are not going to make an ongoing problem for the next generation. I would also suggest that consulting with our First Nations people to dig up more uranium in areas where uranium and other mining has taken so much away from them is going to be time consuming, and really not very helpful. We've got a wealth of knowledge amongst our First Nations people that can help us with climate change. So there are other solutions for the government to pursue that's not going to cost us an absolute fortune, will be more timely, because it's imperative we reach our goal. And we don't believe that nuclear energy is the way to go. So thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Dalton.
Bolton?
Bolton, sorry, Bolton. Jeez.
Long day.
All right, it's been a long few weeks.
I have a scientific background, and I've never been opposed to nuclear energy as any matter of principle. In fact, I still look forward to fusion as a possible future. But when you sort of step back and look at what these technologies consist of, I mean, nuclear fission is basically a very old technology in the sense you just make heat to boil water and turn a turbine. We've been doing that with coal and gas for years. And there isn't that much opportunity for technological advance that's going to make a huge amount of impression on the cost. We look at something like, and the same is true of wind farms to some extent, because they've greatly improved the generation aspect, the modern magnets they use in the turbines. But I think that also is now to a great degree of maturity. When we look at solar and batteries, there's no obvious reason why they shouldn't continue to improve with quite significant technological advances. So if you take that sort of long-term view, you'd think, well, yes, it's going to be solar and batteries is going to be absolutely key. And it's the economics of the whole thing that really is what I've concentrated on. And I did sort of take a look at a couple of statements by one of the members of the committee in support of nuclear as a sort of a basis for what to respond to. So regarding mixing nuclear and renewables, a 2020 study in Nature found nuclear renewables uptake correlate negatively. And modelling by the International Agency of Energy Economics show that they compete because the higher fixed cost of nuclear favours its use as base load. You need a very high utilisation. And as soon as you start thinking of it as firming, you lose that. And so it becomes very expensive. And the other aspect was on following the crowd, the claim that lots of other countries are going towards nuclear. Well, from 2010 to 2020, costs driven up by rising safety standards and competition from cheap gas and renewables led to a decline in world nuclear output. And there is a predicted growth out to 2050, but it's mostly in China and other emerging and developing economies. Amongst the advanced economies, like USA and so on, their decline is expected to continue, with retirements exceeding additions by 28 gigawatts by 2050. Now, each country has its own geophysical and political circumstances. Central and Southern Europe and the eastern half of China have weaker wind and solar resources than Australia does. The developing economies will necessarily buy their plant from advanced ones, and those advanced ones selling them may have ulterior motives for offering mates rates, extension of geopolitical influence, and maintaining domestic expertise applicable to weapons programs. All countries cap the liability of nuclear plant operators, and developing economies may opt for lower caps and thereby make the apparent cost of nuclear lower. Now, I did a chart here. Can I hand these to you? Is that okay?
You can table those, yep.
Yeah.
Secretariat will grab. The Secretariat will come grab those. Stay there. Secretariat will come.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this first chart shows the growth of nuclear, hydro, wind and solar PV in China since 2008 in terms of the gigawatt hours contributed to the grid. And what really stands out there is that what the nuclear was starts off above both solar and wind, but by the end it's been overtaken by both. And not just overtaken, but the solar and wind are climbing much faster. In fact, if you look at the planned nuclear in China, according to each 5-year plan, what you see is a habit of falling well short. So in the table here, I see that in the 2010 5-year plan, it said that by 2015, they were going to build 32 gigawatts of new nuclear. In fact, they only managed 13. Then in the 2015 plan, by 2020, they were going to have another 35 gigawatts, and they managed 28. They got a bit closer. But then the 2020 plan said 29 gigawatts, and here we are in 2024, and they've only built 7. So the idea is that China's future plans show there's going to be huge growth in nuclear has to be taken with a substantial grain of salt. And that's my contribution.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chesters, we'll go to you first. Mr. Chester, sorry, we'll go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I'm sorry that I'm not there in person for all the witnesses, so this might be a little bit confusing to follow. We'll see how we go. Just to be clear, I have a Sale High School education, year 12, not pretending to be a nuclear expert. Mr. Bolton, you indicated you had a scientific background. Do any other witnesses have any particular expertise in nuclear energy or mining, or is it more involvement through community groups?
My background is mathematics more than anything else.
Okay, so no one's particularly expertise in nuclear. That's not a judgment, just trying to get any of the backgrounds.
I don't have any specific nuclear training.
No, not
And in terms of the witnesses before us today, do any of you live near an existing coal-fired power station or a large-scale renewable project, actually live within 20, 30, 40 kilometres of those?
We'll just go to Ms. Parker first, Mr. Chester. She just was about to say something.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say that I have a master's degree in sustainability, but that's
Thank you.
neither here nor there.
Yep, would you like to answer the last question Mr. Chester asked?
No, I'm not living close to a coal.
No, we're Newtown Clim.
We're Newtown. We're in a city.
Okay, a lot of the evidence we've heard, regional locations from living nearby large-scale renewable projects has been concerned about the impact on the environment and a lack of respect being shown to them with this fast rollout of large-scale renewables. Are you surprised to hear that?
I'm sorry, it's a little tricky to hear you. Is anyone else having trouble?
If you could just repeat that question, Mr. Chester, please.
Thanks, Chair. A bit of feedback here wasn't there before. I'm not sure what that's about. The feedback we've received from a lot of the regional communities we've visited is concern about the rollout of large-scale renewable projects in their communities. There's been impacts on farming land, concern about the impact on the environment and degradation of the biodiversity and a lack of respect shown to the communities. Given you don't live in those communities, are you surprised to hear that sort of feedback coming from those regional areas?
No. My husband was from Muswellbrook. We were actually in Muswellbrook a couple of years ago, and that community has been absolutely destroyed. The cattle industries, which was primarily dairy, is on its knees. When you go into the town, it's gone from a very thriving regional town to a very depressed regional town. And I have a feeling that they do not want nuclear in their backyard. We've got to find other ways to create innovative ways that people in regional communities can actually grow and develop, which doesn't include digging up and putting in infrastructure that can potentially harm the community. So, yeah, I think that's a big issue for regional people.
Ken Enderby here. Look, all economic development involves disruption. It involves damage to the environment and disruption to people's lives. That's a fact of life. It can't be avoided. You know, when the car industry was closed down in this country, which is something which I actually supported, it caused massive disruption. But that didn't mean it shouldn't happen. I mean, people ultimately did find other jobs. The key is to help them find other jobs. The same with the NIMBY principle. My next door neighbour has a stink pipe in the back of his yard, for God's sake. I don't like it being there. None of us like it. It looks ugly. But we've just got to put up with it. Everybody has to put up with something that's going on in their community. We need this rollout urgently. We are so far behind in terms of acting on climate. It is 1 minute to midnight, okay? We need to act as quickly as possible, and the quickest way to get there is with renewable energy.
Dr. Fernberg, you want to add to this?
Yes, thank you. Although I don't live near a major power station of any sort, I am from a regional area, and many of our members of Bushfire Survivors for Climate Action are also regional people. So I just did want to mention that. I also wanted to mention, in terms of the concern about large renewable projects impacting on agricultural productivity and biodiversity, certainly design of renewable energy projects needs to be done carefully. It hasn't always been done carefully in the past, and it can do better. There is progress being made in co-utilization of land for renewable energy and agriculture, both with wind and solar. There's some really nice progress being made with what's called agrivoltaics, which is farming sheep in the same space with solar panels. The sheep actually do better and produce more and better quality wool when they get to take shade under solar panels. And there's a great deal of progress being made on the impact of wind turbines on bird populations. There is not very much published data, but there is a little bit. And I have some statistics I can share from a US 2009 study into causes of bird mortality in the United States, if that would be
You
useful.
can table that to the
Okay.
Secretariat, please. That'd be
Gladly.
great. Thank you. Mr. Chester, back to you.
Thanks, Andrea. And I do agree that every development has an impact, and it's just important that we perhaps don't pretend there's no impacts in these regional communities of large-scale renewables. I do take some exception to suggesting that Australia hasn't played its part. We've met all international targets, and I think one of the witnesses indicated we have one of the highest penetration rates of rooftop solar in the world over the last 10 years. So there has been a lot of work done by Australian governments and residents. But my question more relates to this issue of whether there's a risk of overbuilding renewables, more renewables than you need to build because they don't actually have because of the intermittent factor. The evidence we've received is you do need some firming beyond batteries, and the question I put is, given a couple of witnesses have said they're not against nuclear per se, they're just worried about the timing. If you could be convinced that the nuclear timing could meet that gap, would you agree that overbuilding of renewables should be avoided because of the impacts on the environment? If you could get some comfort around the timing, or are you completely opposed to nuclear power ever being part of the Australian energy mix?
As far as the timing is concerned, I just want to give the example of South Australia, which has almost hit 75% renewable now. It's going to hit 100% in 3 years' time. The latest project that was only announced yesterday will get it to that point. If South Australia can get there, how can the rest of us not get there as well? I have completely converted my house to renewables. I've got solar panels, heat pump, induction cooker, battery, and an electric vehicle, and I'm making it pay in my own life. How can we not do this as a country as a whole? Of course we can. I'm not opposed to nuclear per se. I actually was an anti-nuclear activist. I changed my view on nuclear about 30 years ago, mainly on the safety grounds. When the new generation of reactors came out, it became clear that they're much, much safer, that the waste disposal problem has technologically been solved. It's all a political problem now. But politically, it's such a minefield. It's a waste of time going down this path. We don't need it. We do not need it. We can go straight to renewables.
So you're not concerned at all about the price that overbuilding renewables, serious impact on the environment, also in the footprint of a nuclear power station?
I said before, all development involves disruption to the environment. When we were living in caves, some other creatures had to be evicted from the caves, for God's sake, to make way. There is some disruption no matter what happens. It's a fact of life. We all put up with it now. It's part of modern society. Renewables are going to do the same thing. Coal mines cause the same thing. Lithium mines cause the same thing. They all cause the same thing. The key question is, which is the most damaging? Damage to the climate or damage to a local environment? That's the point we have to look at. And in most cases, we'll find out the damage to the environment is the significant threat.
Ms. Parker, I think, just wanted to add to that. Mr. Chester?
Yes, I just wanted to add this kind of theoretical point at which we overbuild on renewables. I think we're far, far, far from hitting that. In Newtown in particular, there's huge support and huge desire to take up rooftop solar. Unfortunately, Newtown has one of the highest rates of highest proportions of rental households in the country. At the last census, almost 60% of households in Newtown were renters, so they don't have the option to put solar on their roofs. there's so much more scope for urban take-up of renewable energy, and we'd love to see the government support renters and low-income families take up that opportunity before we can even think about talking about, oh, we've overbuilt renewables. That's still so far off.
Can I also...
No, the point, sorry, the point I was making with top solar was the recommendation or the advice we received from the US that there was concerns about overbuilding large-scale, industrial-scale renewable projects, that if you had a portion of nuclear in the market, you would be able to avoid some of that overbuilding.
Can I just...
rooftop solar whatsoever, and Australia does.
I would just like to go back to what I said in my statement. We have so much land in this country. And if we were to use renewables like solar and wind, we would not make the sort of impact that nuclear would. I'd also like to just raise, and I hope that's okay, the financial cost of it. You know, billions and billions of dollars to put nuclear in, and at what cost? And this is where the teacher in me comes out. Education, health, aged care, early childhood, all of those things that we're struggling with as it is. So why choose something that is billions of dollars more at the cost of the social infrastructure in here? I don't understand that.
Can I just add to the point about land use? The figure from the United States is that the amount of land needed to provide solar power for the entire country by 2050 is just 3 times the amount of land currently devoted to golf courses. It's bugger all.
We're talking about renewables versus nuclear, and I'm personally not comfortable with posing that as a dichotomy. I don't feel it should be an either-or choice, but in terms of the question before us today, in terms of environmental impact, it sort of sounded like we were accepting the premise that there's an environmental impact of renewable energy developments, but no environmental impact of nuclear power generation, which is, of course, a false premise. There's an environmental impact of nuclear power generation, and in fact, in those bird mortality statistics that I mentioned, the number of birds killed by nuclear power stations was about 15 times the number of birds killed by wind turbines. But going back to
to be clear, the coalition policy is not an either-or option. It's intended to be a balanced approach between large-scale renewables plus nuclear. That's what we're exploring. No one from the coalition on this inquiry has been suggesting no large-scale renewables. My point was just raising one bit of witness evidence that there's an opportunity to avoid overbuilding of large-scale renewables in the regional communities where there are some concerns of loss of agricultural land, loss of biodiversity. So there's an opportunity to reduce the overbuild if you had a smaller footprint of nuclear in some strategic locations in Australia. So that was the evidence we received from a US expert, not suggesting no renewables, suggesting that you could reduce the amount you needed to build and still achieve your emission reductions, given there's no emissions coming from the nuclear power plant.
As I said with the golf course example, the amount of land is insignificant.
Mr. Bolton, you'd like to add to this?
Yes, I'd just like clarification on what is being meant here by overbuilding. It's always been understood that with solar and wind, you would want to build more total capacity than the peak demand, because you don't expect to have a terribly high capacity factor.
I think we're in furious agreement. The best results from renewables around the 30 to 40% of installed capacity.
Yes, but what do you mean by overbuilding here? I don't understand.
Well, the point is you build more renewables to achieve the target of generation, given the intermittency of your source of generation. So
but that's not overbuilding. That's not overbuilding. That's building the right amount.
Yep. And listen, I'm doing this at my home and I'm making it pay. Yes, I've got overcapacity, but I can pay it all off. And I'm going to pay off the cost of my electric vehicle in 15 years as well. This is a really cost-effective renewables.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chester. Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me before I go to Mr. Burnell. Ms. Fernberger, just some questions around your members. Your members have been through extremely traumatic and dramatic times in their lives, obviously, with what's been happening around bushfires around Australia and everywhere. Do you have concerns if we don't move forwards with renewables, that we will see more and more bushfires? And I'm from the Hunter, and we have had many natural disasters in our area, and I would love to see no more. But do you have concerns around that?
Absolutely. Our 2,300 supporters are from around the country, mostly in regional areas because they're people who have been impacted by bushfires. These are people and communities whose stories paint a picture of being personally harmed by climate change that is already happening. It's not in the future. To these folks, there's no longer any good enough on climate change. It is already upon us. What they're hoping for is to stop it from continuing to get worse and worse. All further emissions now are already worsening the problem. Even if it's ultimately decided to continue exploring the idea of nuclear generation for Australia, it would still be irresponsibly risky and short-sighted to delay, postpone, or obstruct continuing the current transition to renewable energy that's already happening. It would be reckless to hit the brakes on the renewable energy transition now, because we need to slash that climate pollution now to stop climate change from continuing to get worse and worse into the future. And that's going to continue to fuel those disasters that we've been seeing more and more of.
Thank you, Dr. Fernberger. And this is a question to the whole panel. Do you think it's acceptable that the Coalition announced a policy, which Mr. Burnell has here, a 5-page document plus a front cover, 7 months ago or 6 months ago, and gave 7 sites around Australia, but then has given no information since? We don't know what size reactors they're talking about. We don't know how many reactors per site. We don't know how much power they're going to generate. We don't know how much they're going to cost. We don't know how much water they're going to use. We don't know how long they will take to do the consultation period. We don't know what areas they're going to take shortcuts on throughout this process to try and get them done in that 10 to 12 year time frame that they're talking about. Do you think that's acceptable to the Australian public?
Absolutely not. It's not acceptable to the Australian population. It's certainly not acceptable to our members.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be to us.
Not to us.
And it's actually a little contemptuous, if the truth be known, not to have a clear roadmap of how they're going to proceed.
Okay. We are hearing things that we're going to have something coming out soon, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it makes it so hard to have a proper discussion about, because you don't have any clear actual proposal to discuss. Every time you put up objections, oh, we'll do this instead. I mean, it's trying to herd sheep.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Mr. Burnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for providing evidence today. I wanted to go to the public consultation piece, and there's been a lot of discussion around the need for the 7 regional areas that have been earmarked for the consultation to be able to have the right to veto. There's also been discussion around the next election sometime in 2025 being a referendum on nuclear energy. And I wanted to get your thoughts on, or get your thoughts around, if people don't have the ability to say no, then is it fair to say that they can't say yes? If you don't have the facts before you, how do you have an informed position? If you don't have the right to veto, then do you have the right to say yes? Because
If you don't know, say no.
Yes.
Heard of that somewhere.
Probably wasn't quite saying that.
Isn't it a reality that referendums don't get up in this country unless there's bipartisan support? And we saw that in October last year.
So I'm not saying that the coalition is saying they're going to have a referendum on nuclear energy, but it's been touted that the next election will be a pseudo referendum on nuclear power generation in this country. Does that not circumvent the ability to have clear, concise consultation with the whole of Australia's population, with the ability to have an informed position to make a decision on whether or not this country is in agreement as to whether or not to pursue a nuclear energy future.
Well, I always think there's a problem with so-called mandates. You know, you can't, a party goes to an election with a policy platform, and if they win the election, then they can sort of claim a mandate on all these items, whereas in fact, if you tested each individually, it maybe was only one item everybody was really in favour and didn't like anything else. So I really don't see that can be interpreted that way.
I guess it's how do you ensure a really balanced view gets to the electorate? You know, who's going to manage that? Because it would depend on who's managing it as to how fair it would be.
And community consultation isn't consultation if the outcome is, you know, a foregone conclusion. That's not communities being able to make an informed decision and have a real say on what happens in their communities. It's just not.
Mr. Enderby?
It is difficult not to see this policy as just a way of postponing action on climate, to be honest. Just saying we can do it in 20, 25 years' time instead of taking action now. That's how we see it.
Just going back to the urgency piece, without information on what the plans are, I don't see how the Australian people can be, or communities can be asked to make a choice. But community consultation can't be overemphasized, and as Ms. Parker said, community co-design really should be the model, but just can't overemphasize the urgency and the fact that, you know, even if and when the 7 reactors were to be built, they're still only generating a fraction of the needs, and other energy needs to come from somewhere else.
Just on a point of clarification though, we don't know if it's only 7 reactors. They haven't announced how many reactors, and I think we need to be clear too, small modular reactors are not commercially available to be built, and the 2 sites, so the site in my home state in South Australia, Port Augusta, and the site in Western Australia have been slated for small modular reactors. So the reality is there's probably only 5 sites are in play right now, but we don't know the number of reactors, and you know, it's been nearly 7 months since they released the policy, and we're still waiting on the actual proper details. So,
Point rightly taken. Thank you.
Yeah. Why should the taxpayer pay for this, for God's sake? You know, if we were to have any faith in this, you'd think the private sector would be stumping up money for it. The private sector is running from it 100 miles an hour, just like the private sector is in the United States. If private sector is finished with nuclear power in the United States, why would we be interested in it here?
Any other thoughts on that? No? Just my last question, just on the broader discussion around public consultation. Do you think 2.5 years is enough time to be able to do the right level of consultation with the public to reach a consensus view in these communities?
No.
I think particularly.
Sorry,
I was just. I don't think that 2.5 years is enough time across the board. I think that particularly for consultation with First Nations people, that's not nearly long enough.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, including questions on notice,